Imagine being a veteran who sacrificed everything for your country, only to come home and fight a different kind of battle, one against your own neighborhood. That's exactly what happened to Jack, a disabled veteran who had lost partial use of his legs in service. For years, he'd managed to get by, struggling with stairs, and relying on his family to help him move in and out of the house. But eventually, the pain became too much, and his doctor insisted he build a proper wheelchair ramp to protect his health. What should have been a simple, necessary project turned into a storm he never saw coming. Jack wasn't a man who liked asking for help. He had always prided himself on his independence, even after the accident that left him in a wheelchair. But as the days wore on, every trip down the stairs of his modest suburban home became a hazard. His wife worried constantly, his teenage son was practically carrying him half the time, and Jack knew this wasn't sustainable. So, one weekend, with the support of his family and a few friends from the veterans community, he began building a simple wooden ramp that would stretch from his porch to the driveway. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, sturdy, and, most importantly, the first few hours of work went smoothly. Jack felt a rare spark of excitement. Finally, something was about to get easier in his life. But that relief didn't last long. By the second afternoon of construction, a sharp voice cut through the sound of hammers and drills. It was Linda, the head of the neighborhood HOA. She marched up the driveway with her arms crossed, eyes narrowed like she'd just caught a criminal. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" she snapped, glaring at the partially built ramp. Jack, caught off guard, adjusted himself in his chair and calmly explained, "I'm building a ramp. Doctor's orders. These stairs are killing me." But Linda wasn't interested in his explanation. Her lips tightened, and she shook her head. "This is not allowed. It violates HOA guidelines. You can't just go slapping unsightly wooden structures on the front of your property. It ruins the aesthetic of our community." For a moment, Jack just stared at her in disbelief. He thought maybe she hadn't heard him correctly, so he repeated, "It's a wheelchair ramp. I need it to get in and out of my home safely." Linda's response was as cold as ice. "That's not my problem. Rules are rules. Either you take this down immediately, or the HOA will issue fines until you comply." The exchange left Jack's family stunned. His wife tried to step in, explaining the medical necessity, but Linda only grew more aggressive. "If we let you break the rules, then what's to stop the next neighbor from building a shed in their front yard, or painting their house neon green? The HOA exists for order and uniformity, and you are not an exception." That night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the paperwork Linda had shoved into his hands. A list of HOA violations and threats of escalating fines. His teenage son was fuming, pacing the living room. "How can she even say that to you? You literally fought for this country, and she's mad about a ramp." His wife tried to stay calm, but Jack could see the stress on her face. They didn't have money to fight a drawn-out legal battle, and the HOA knew it, but Jack wasn't ready to give up. For the first time in years, he felt the same determination he'd had in combat. The kind of fire that refused to back down in the face of injustice. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was about dignity. It was about fairness. And it was about standing up to someone who thought they could bully him into submission. The next morning, Linda showed up again, this time with 2 HOA board members. They stood on Jack's driveway like judges at a trial, pointing and whispering about community standards. Jack wheeled himself outside and met them head-on. "I'm not taking this ramp down," he said firmly. "It's my right to live safely in my own home." Linda smirked, almost like she'd been waiting for that response. "Then get ready for fines. Daily fines. And if you think the HOA won't escalate this to court, think again." By now, neighbors had started to notice the confrontation. Some peeked out from behind their curtains. Others stood awkwardly at the edge of their lawns. Jack could feel their eyes on him, but not one of them spoke up. And that silence cut deeper than Linda's threats. It made him wonder, would anyone actually support him, or was he truly alone in this battle? That night, Jack's phone rang. It was one of his fellow veterans, a man named Paul who lived a few streets over. "I heard what's going on," Paul said. "You don't have to fight this alone. I know a lawyer who helps vets pro bono. Let's see what the HOA does when they realize you're not an easy target." For the first time since the confrontation began, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Linda thought she was dealing with just another homeowner she could intimidate. But she had no idea that this simple ramp would soon turn into a war. One that would draw in lawyers, the community, and even the court. And as Jack looked at the unfinished wooden ramp outside his window, he whispered to himself, "This ramp is staying. No matter what." The following week, Jack noticed the first official letter from the HOA slipped into his mailbox. It was neatly typed, stamped with the HOA seal, and written in the cold, legalistic tone of someone who believed paperwork was stronger than people. Immediate removal of unauthorized structure. It read, "Failure to comply will result in fines of $250 per day, accruing until full compliance is achieved." Jack's stomach twisted as he reread the number. $250 a day. Money he didn't have. This wasn't just pressure. This was extortion, plain and simple. Jack's wife tried to keep him calm, reminding him of Paul's offer to connect with a lawyer. But Jack couldn't shake the image of Linda's smug smile as she had stood in his driveway, confident that she held all the power. For Linda, this wasn't about community standards. This was about control, and she thrived on it. The lawyer Paul recommended turned out to be a sharp, fast-talking woman named Rachel. She specialized in disability rights cases and had built a reputation for tearing apart predatory HOAs. After hearing Jack's story, she leaned back in her chair and said, "They don't stand a chance in court. Federal law is on your side. The Fair Housing Act requires reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. A wheelchair ramp is not a luxury, it's a necessity, and the ADA backs that up. What your HOA is doing isn't just wrong. It's illegal." Hearing those words lit a fire in Jack's chest. For the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't an uphill battle after all. But Rachel wasn't finished. She warned him that while the law was clear, the HOA would fight dirty. "They'll try to bury you in paperwork, intimidate you with threats, and drag this out until you're exhausted. But if you hold your ground, we can win this." True to Rachel's prediction, the HOA came at Jack with everything they had. Within days, more letters arrived. Some threatened liens on his house. Others claimed the ramp decreased property values. For surrounding homes, Linda even circulated a petition around the neighborhood, asking residents to sign against the unsightly structure. Jack watched from his window as she went door to door, clipboard in hand, using every ounce of her charm to spin the story. According to her, Jack was selfish, disruptive, and disregarded the rules everyone else lived by. At first, neighbors signed without hesitation. Some were too polite to refuse Linda directly. Others simply wanted to avoid trouble. But not everyone was willing to follow blindly. One afternoon, Jack's next-door neighbor, a quiet man named David, came over with the petition in his hand. "I couldn't sign it," he admitted. "My brother's in a wheelchair. If someone had tried to stop him from building a ramp, I would have lost it. What they're doing to you is disgusting." That moment gave Jack a boost of courage he hadn't felt in weeks. He wasn't entirely alone. Not everyone in the neighborhood bought into Linda's intimidation tactics. And little by little, others began to step forward too. A mother down the street, whose son had special needs, sent Jack a note of support. An elderly couple who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades quietly told him they thought Linda had finally gone too far. But Linda wasn't about to back down. The more pushback she got, the more aggressive she became. She sent out mass emails to the HOA members, warning of a slippery slope. If Jack's ramp was allowed to remain, what's next? She wrote. Unsanctioned sheds, unapproved paint colors, cars parked in lawns. This is how communities fall apart. Jack couldn't help but laugh bitterly when he read it. Was she really comparing a wheelchair ramp, his literal lifeline, to a neon paint job or junkyard on a front lawn? It was absurd, but the scary part was, some people actually believed her. Rachel, however, knew exactly how to handle it. She filed a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority and sent the HOA a cease and desist letter, citing federal law. "You're discriminating against a disabled veteran." The letter read in bold. "Any further harassment will be documented and used in court." When Linda received that letter, she lost her composure. Jack could see it in the way she stormed up his driveway the next day, fuming like a kettle about to boil over. "You think a lawyer is going to scare me?" she hissed. "I've been running this HOA for 10 years. You won't win. People like you never win." Jack didn't rise to her bait. Instead, he looked her in the eye and said calmly, "People like me? You mean disabled veterans? You're going to regret those words in court." That small exchange was witnessed by more than just Jack's family. A group of neighbors had gathered across the street, pretending to chat but clearly listening in. Word spread quickly. By that evening, Jack's phone was buzzing with messages from people who'd previously stayed quiet. Some wanted to apologize for signing Linda's petition. Others offered to testify on his behalf if it came to court. Linda's iron grip on the neighborhood was starting to crack. The more she pushed, the more people realized how cruel and unreasonable she truly was. But that only made her more dangerous. And Jack knew the battle was about to escalate to its peak, because Rachel had just informed him that the case had been officially filed in court. There would be a hearing, and soon, everything, the ramp, the HOA, Linda's obsession with control, would be laid bare before a judge. As Jack lay in bed that night, staring at the unfinished ramp outside his window, he felt both nervous and determined. He hadn't asked for this fight, but now that it had started, he wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been bullied, silenced, or trampled by people like Linda. And he was ready to see it through. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm cloud hanging over the neighborhood. Jack had barely slept. His mind raced with all the possible outcomes. What if the judge sided with Linda? What if the HOA managed to twist the law somehow? The ramp was more than wood and screws. It was his independence, his dignity, his chance to live without being trapped inside his own home. Losing this fight would feel like losing everything. When Jack rolled into the courthouse, supported by his wife and his lawyer Rachel, he was stunned to see a small group of neighbors waiting outside. Some were holding signs that read, "Accessibility is a right," and "Support our veteran." Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't asked for anyone to do this. He hadn't expected it. But there they were, standing for him. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was fighting alone. Inside the courtroom, Linda sat at the opposite table, arms folded, her lips pursed in a smug little smile. She wore a bright red blazer that screamed authority, but the stack of papers beside her looked more like weapons than evidence. She whispered sharply to the HOA's attorney, a stiff man in a gray suit who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, entered with quiet authority. "Court is now in session," she announced. The room fell silent. Rachel wasted no time. She rose and presented Jack's case with calm precision, her voice carrying both passion and control. She spoke about Jack's military service, his disability, and his right to live with dignity. She cited the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and cases from other courts that had set clear precedent. "This ramp," she said firmly, gesturing toward the photos of Jack's unfinished project, "is not an optional addition. It is a necessity for Mr. Thompson's health, safety, and independence. Denying him this ramp is not only unreasonable, it is unlawful." Jack felt a wave of pride as Rachel spoke. She wasn't just defending him. She was fighting for something bigger, the principle that people with disabilities deserved equal treatment no matter what. Then it was the HOA's turn. Their lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled his papers nervously. He argued that the ramp violated the aesthetic standards of the community and that it set a dangerous precedent. "If we allow this," he warned, "homeowners will feel free to disregard the rules whenever it suits them. Property values will decline, and the integrity of the neighborhood will be compromised." But the judge's expression didn't soften. In fact, she leaned forward slightly and asked, "Are you equating a medical necessity with, say, someone painting their house neon green?" The HOA lawyer stammered, "Well, Your Honor, it's about consistency of enforcement," but the judge raised a hand to cut him off. "Consistency cannot come at the expense of human rights. Continue." Then came Linda's turn, and she couldn't resist speaking for herself. She stood, her voice sharp and dripping with disdain. "This ramp doesn't just ruin the look of the neighborhood, it ruins the harmony. We all follow the rules. Why should he be any different? If he can't live here without special treatment, maybe this isn't the community for him." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the HOA's lawyer seemed to shrink into his chair, wishing she hadn't said it. Jack felt his blood boil, but he stayed silent, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. He didn't need to say a word. Linda had just revealed her true nature for everyone to see. Rachel seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but cutting, "the opposing side has made their position abundantly clear. This is not about property values. This is not about community standards. This is about discrimination. A veteran who risked his life for this country is being told he doesn't belong in his own neighborhood because of his disability. If that isn't unlawful, then what is?" The judge sat back in silence for a long moment, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "I don't need more time to deliberate. The law here is clear. Mr. Thompson has the absolute right to construct a wheelchair ramp as a reasonable accommodation. The HOA's actions are in violation of federal law. I am ordering an immediate cease of all fines, the withdrawal of any liens, and I am instructing the HOA to pay damages for the undue stress caused. Furthermore, Mrs. Linda Harper," she turned her eyes directly on Linda, "your conduct and statements today reflect poorly on the integrity of this HOA. I strongly suggest you reconsider your role in leadership." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case closed. Jack exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. His wife squeezed his hand, and Rachel gave him a small, victorious smile. Around the courtroom, neighbors clapped quietly, some even standing in silent support. Linda stormed out, her heels clacking against the floor, her face pale with fury. For the first time, she wasn't in control, and she knew it. Outside, Jack was greeted by the same neighbors who had shown up earlier. David, his quiet next-door neighbor, shook his hand. "You did it, Jack. You stood up to her. You stood up for all of us." Jack looked back at his house later that evening, at the unfinished ramp, still waiting to be completed. But this time, when he pictured it finished, he didn't just see wood and nails. He saw freedom. He saw community. He saw justice. The ramp would be built, not as a sign of defiance, but as a symbol of resilience. And in that moment, Jack realized something powerful. Sometimes, the fight you never wanted becomes the fight that changes everything.